Candy's condemnation of Curly works to win George's trust because Candy is insulting the boss's son, an act which could get him into trouble. George knows this, and it makes him trust Candy because Candy has offered George a bit of honesty about the boss's family that could ultimately hurt his, Candy's, standing on the farm. The gesture is made more significant because the boss himself is an imposing figure. The boss's irritation with George and Lenny for being late, his insistence that they were supposed to be there the day before, and his records for them in his little book are all reminders that he has the power to fire them and throw them off of his farm as soon as he wants. Candy may insist that the boss is a pretty nice fella, but he does so after describing that the boss gives the stable buck hell when he's mad. If that description seems contradictory, it is. Candy's evidence that the boss is a nice guy is that he once supplied them a whole gallon of whiskey at Christmas. In the context of migrant workers during the Great Depression, this behavior might have passed for relative generosity, but Steinbeck's choice to frame it as part of the boss's mistreatment of crooks, the black stable buck, gives us plenty of reason to be skeptical about the boss. Steinbeck continues his characterization of the boss through his use of clothing and hands. He describes the boss walking into the bunkhouse with the short steps of a fat-legged man and dressed with a soiled Stetson hat and high-heeled boots and spurs to prove he was not a laboring man, among other things. Both of those articles of clothing can be read as symbols, and we'll get to the hat when we discuss Slim. So let's focus on the high-heeled boots, which we would better know as cowboy boots. Steinbeck provides us a description to make sense of that symbol of the high-heeled boots. He writes that the boss wears them to prove he was not a laboring man. If you've ever worn cowboy boots, you know they are not well suited to strenuous manual labor. They're great for riding, but if you need to harvest crops like the workers on the ranch, you're better off with traditional work boots. We obviously expect the boss to be different than his workers, but in this case, the boots show us what the boss has that the ranch hands lack: wealth, which gives him those spurs, and we should remember that spurs are attachments for cowboy boots that allow the rider to dig into the side of the horse so that the animal will move faster than it is already. We can draw a direct parallel from that tool of inflicting pain to the boss's mistreatment of crooks and his displeasure that Lenny and George had not been there the night before. Moreover, the boss's hands are constantly depicted in motions aligned with his position of authority and power, pulling his time book out of his pocket, pointing at Lenny, and resting his hands on his belt. Lastly, the boss's questioning of George and Lenny let us know exactly what kind of place this is. When George speaks up for Lenny, the boss accuses George of taking Lenny's pay and exploiting him because he's never seen one guy take so much trouble for another guy. To the boss, it's more plausible that George is taking advantage of Lenny than he is taking care of him. That suspicion and sense of displeasure both indicate that George and Lenny are in a precarious situation on the ranch and with the boss.